of a critical pedagogy, advocating a pedagogy with a new relationship between the teacher, the student, and society. Freire developed an approach to education that links the identification of issues with positive actions for change and development. While Freire's original work was in adult literacy, his approach leads us to think about how we can read the society around us, says Institute Paulo Freire. For Carlo Scolari and Riano Motta, applying the Paulo Freire method does not mean messing around in a classroom. On the contrary, it represents a serious opportunity to learn the practice of loving and being solidary. Paulo Freire makes clear that only in fullness of this act of loving in its existence, in its practice, is the true solidarity. For people who still don't know him, Paulo Freire is the patron of Brazilian education, the Brazilian who has been awarded honorary doctorates most often, and the author of the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed, considered one of the most quoted books in social science in the world, and his works were included in a UNESCO program called Memory of the World. However, he's better known as the boy who reads the world, or utopian wandering. Right. Let me talk about the international panel. In this Freirean dialogue, the panelists will debate the process of humanization in education in light of a knowledge produced by popular movements and decolonial thoughts. This is a partnership between University of East Anglia, Federal University of São Paulo, and Landless Works Movement, the MST, part of a 2-week program that will celebrate Paulo Freire's centenary at University of Cambridge and will be held today, right now. That's what's going on right now. Our aim is to turn this international panel into a place for dialogue. It's like a two-way street. On the one hand, active participation of the audience. On the other hand, interaction between the panelists, audience based on knowledge produced in popular movements. As Paulo Freire points out, in such a necessary encounter, there are no ignorant absolutes, nor wise absolutes. There are men and women who in communion seek to know more. In order to do that, we have decided to use one of the pedagogical practices developed by MST, Landless Works Movement, based on solidarity and collective identity. It's called Mystica, which embodies artistic presentation, including performance, plastic arts, and music. The artistic elements constitute mobilizing forces of the sense of belonging and establishment of distinctions between us and them. Songs, dance, theater contribute to identify formation. They are the expression of a collective feeling that unites identities, strengthens their spirits of resistance and struggle. Mystica draws on a Christian theology generally, and specifically on the practice of a Christian-based communities associated with liberation theology, which are the key in the emergency of the Landless Works movement. So we're gonna have a short opening and ending video where you can experience what does Mystica mean in practical terms. After the opening, the panelists will have a dialogue where the talk does the talk. First of all, they will place Paulo Freire's work historically and epistemological and cultural political terms. And then they'll look into the new pedagogical practice experience within and outside academia. Finally, the panelists will discuss the new challenges, possibilities for a humanized education, where Freire's idea of inedito viável opens up spaces to reveal the concrete implications for society and education when it comes to struggles for liberation. Bear in mind what Paulo Freire has taught all of us: no one liberates anyone. No one liberates himself alone. People are liberating communion. So it's not a mission or model, because it's not option, orientation, is a political project. Before we play the video, I'd like to give a brief...
Gibson, desculpa eu te interromper. Não está sendo transmitido áudio em português em nenhuma dos links em português no YouTube. Só aparece o áudio, só são transmitidos os áudios nos links em inglês. Então, aparece em inglês, tudo bem, mas o pessoal no Brasil não está tendo acesso em português. Eu já falei, mas não sei o que está acontecendo, por isso que eu te interrompi.
Right, but I must carry on, otherwise it'll be like running against the clock, isn't it?
É que eles não vão ver o vídeo, não vão ter acesso a nada, né?
Sueli, eu acho que uma alternativa é colocar o link do Zoom lá no chat do YouTube, para quem quiser ouvir em português, entrar aqui e aí acessar a interpretação.
Ok, obrigada.
Okay, thank you, Alexandre, for your contribution. We're just trying to fix some technical issues. It happens every single online transmission. It happens every single time. So I do apologize for that. But going back to what I was saying, I'm going to go through the biography of the panelists before we play the video, the opening video, the Mystica. Okay? Maria de Jesus dos Santos Gomes, she's from Landless Works Movement, agriculture settled by the agrarian reform in the Bernardo Marim settlement in Russas, Ceará. Graduated in pedagogy from UNIGU in south of Brazil, specialist in education, the countryside, and development from UNB, Federal University of Brasilia. And also she's a specialist in education, work in social movements from Joaquim Venancio School, Rio de Janeiro. Leader of the education sector of MST in Ceará, of the national executive of the education sector of the MST. Dr. Marianja Graciano from Federal University of São Paulo. She's a professor in education department of Federal University of São Paulo, whose research focused on education of young people, adults, and have been deprived of freedom, as well as popular education. The courses she delivers on youth and adult education, diversity in education practice in the school of people deprived of liberty, and social movements, youth and adult education. She's involved in extramural projects such as Observatory for Human Rights and
Recording in progress.
Incarcerate population, of which she's a member, and she coordinates the Citizenship School of Ademar Pereira, Pedreira Town, beg your pardon. She's a member of the research group Freire Studies and UNESCO Chair in Applied Research for Education and Prison. And finally, the last but not the least important panelist, Dr. Spiros Temelis from the University of East Anglia. He's Associate Professor in Education at the University of East Anglia. His research and publication focus on social mobility, minorities in education, especially Gypsy Roman travelers, widening participation and social movements. He has published a monography, Social Change Education in Greece, a study in classes struggle dynamics, and several papers in international journals. The latest book is the title Critical Reflections on the Language of a Neoliberalism in Education, Dangerous Words and Discourses of Possibility. Now, I would like to play, after all presentation of the panelists, I would like to play the video, Mystica, the opening video. Please, guys from the IT support, if you can do that, that'll be very much appreciated.
You are now watching Mystica, and the testimonials will be translated will be put into English.
Quem vive da floresta, dos rios e dos mares, de todos os lugares onde o sol abre uma festa, tem a sua.
O grande educador, o homem em ação, por educação do povo. Paulo Freire!
And rural settlements like Incra or near the city hall, for example, we can do it. We have what it takes to act accordingly to our social needs. Rural education, ensino fundamental, which is Brazilian middle school, rural settlement schools make it possible for learners to become critical beings capable of reading and writing not only words, but the world around them. As learners become aware of their reality, they are likely to become agents of their own reality, feeling as if they belong to this reality, they commit to this reality, as we understand that this reality is not very different from what we live now. Rural schools make it possible for the youth to understand their value and to make them meaningful in the world they live in.
Tudo aconteceu num certo dia, hora da Ave Maria, onde verso viu gerar. No princípio o verbo se fez fogo, nem Atlas tinha um globo, mas tinha nome o lugar. Era terra, terra,
Setembro é o mês que a gente...
The month of September reminds us how of Paulo Freire and how his ideas and work have influenced and contributed to the building and the organization of the landless rural workers movement, which is the MST. This movement organizes communities, organizes people and makes communities who are aware of their freedom and their role and participation in the building of this new being in this new society. Paulo Freire has left in his legacy with a lot of food for thought. One of them being the fact that it is quite naive to expect that the dominant classes would develop an educational system that allowed the nominated classes to critically reflect upon the existing social injustice in Brazil. That is why, comrades, we have to continue our struggle for an education that promotes a process of liberation and emancipation. Let's celebrate Paulo Freire, his legacy, and his struggle.
A minha escola dá salto pro futuro. E vem pra guerra sem caneta na mão. Vermelho e branco pede educação. Sem preconceito, discriminação. Divina luz inspirou, cantamos numa só voz. E Paulo Freire está presente em nós. Divina luz inspirou, cantamos numa só voz. E Paulo Freire está presente em nós. Não abro mão dos meus direitos. Eu também tenho meu conceito. No universo da criação. Mentes são dotadas de virtudes e poder. Basta abrir as portas para florescer. O mundo onde a magia forma os ideais. E o saber não se difere por camadas sociais. É hora de reflexão.
Thank you very much for your participation on the talk. I can see people are really enjoying. Now we can say to everyone, we know a little bit more about Mystica. How does it impact on us? Such a transformational way. It's unbelievable. I'm speechless. I should thank you, NFC, once more for such amazing video. Now, we're going to get the panelists involved in the talk, with this dialogue. Let the talk does the talk. And I'd like to turn to Maria de Jesus, please. Are you Maria de Jesus there? Maria de Jesus, please. Hello? Hello?
Estão me escutando?
Yes, você pode me escutar, Maria de Jesus? Can you hear me?
Maria de Jesus has just, we are trying to get connected to Maria de Jesus.
Então, com alegria,
It's
a todos que participam.
I'm very happy to welcome everyone who's been taking part of this event, which is organized to celebrate the centenary of Paulo Freire, taking into account his project of dehumanization and freedom, which happens in the social movements and the educational movements that we organized. Paulo Freire is being celebrated in the centenary of his birth by every one of us who are part of the social movements, especially by bringing all the vigor of his work, his example as a human being, and his experience as an educator. And as part of the Landless Workers movement, we unite to all the social movements in our country, and also with international social movements, in order to celebrate and to remember and to pay homage to the memory when organizing book circles in order to remember Paulo Freire in rural schools in Brazil, which are located in settlements in Brazil. We have grown, we have planted 100 trees around the schools in order to value or to pay homage to Paulo Freire's work. But based on this, on the reality which we live in, which is surrounded by the COVID pandemic here in Brazil, we are organizing different actions. We are organizing different actions right after the pandemics, which revolve to the idea of organizing the literacy program for the education in our settlements. Our main aim is to provide education in high school level, which is the last educational segment level here in Brazil. For us in the movement, it really means a lot to think of education and its importance. Within this economical crisis we live in, we are getting ourselves organized to build. We have been facing some loss in terms of, we have been fighting and struggling for our loss, especially because we have seen a lot of oppression from the government to the people and the popular classes because of the capitalism. We have noticed that capitalism and this strength, it impacts our own survival in the planet and in nature and in Brazil. Our social movements, we have been struggling, or we have been going, we understand that food is not a means of change, is not, food, water, and earth and places to live are not something that can be sold or can be used as trades in the working class, which is one of the challenges in the working class. Paulo Freire has taught us that reality is that reality is what exactly we are living in. Paulo Freire says the inédito viável, which is the viable unheard of, is something that we have to organize and we have to build on. We have to be attentive to the historical project, which involves social work, which is going to help us get organized and make it better or make it more effective, our work as a society. Paulo Freire has taught us how to esperançar, which is not necessarily only to wait for things to happen, but to get.
Bom dia a todas as pessoas.
Yes, and making your connection between your token and Maria Jesus. You're going to talk about the legacy of Paulo Freire as a resistance, but bear in mind 2 questions: any other historical facts and the difficulties for these new historical facts. Okay, thank you for joining us.
Muito obrigada, parabéns pela
Maria, many thanks for the opportunity of being here, and thank you for the teachers from Unifesp who have indicated me in order to take place in this event. Maria de Jesus, welcome everyone. Maria de Jesus, we really liked the idea of the inédito viável, the viable unheard of, meaning if we get ourselves, if we understand that we are all human beings capable of making and producing knowledge, and this makes us get ourselves recognized as people, and this reflects upon our reality and the way that we reflect upon our reality. This reality and the use of the viable unheard of make it possible for us to constitute ourselves as beings, and not simply beings who serve others. So I'd like to ask, what are the possibilities of making inéditos viáveis possible? Paulo Freire says that we conquer inédito viável when we get to a situation, and based on a rigorous methodology and comprehension of the reality which surrounds us, we gather all the knowledge around us. We do this in a group of people, in communion. We get to different alternatives and different possibilities of understandings. And because of that, we might have some sort of challenges. And I'd like to understand what sorts of challenges that are posed. So what is the role of university in the building of the viable unheard of, and who would be, or who would our partners be in this way, in this struggle to make it the viable unheard of possible? Here in Brazil, we have been having a very unique situation, especially because the Paulo Freire's image is being connected to groups of people who might not necessarily understand his idea, and his image has been identified. Paulo Freire's image is identified with the oppressed, with those who have, for the very first time in history, being recognized as their own subject of their own lives, right? So Paulo Freire's ideas helped us understand minorities as part of the society, and make these minorities be part of a whole society and a bigger society. When Paulo Freire's ideas, it's a way of resistance, right? A way of resistance and fight for minorities. So basically, based on Paulo Freire's ideas, how can we make this moment a moment for reflection upon action in order to make the viable unheard of possible?
Now, I must turn to Spiros from University of East Anglia. And Spiros, please, I'd like to make some connections between your first impressions on the historical facts and the talk of Maria de Jesus and Maria Angela. Please, given the significance of Freire's works, what's the main lesson you learned, and how can we look at this from another perspective? Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, the organizers, for inviting me. Thanks all the participants for making it today. I've been trying to switch off my camera so I don't destabilize any further my connection, so I'll grab this opportunity now that technology is behaving. I think it's very, very timely that we are talking about Freire, and it's very timely for many reasons. First, because there's quite a lot of talk about the crisis, the health crisis. And before that, there was a lot of talk about the economic and financial crisis. In other words, in the last 12, 13 years or so, we have been immersed in conversations about crisis. And just when we thought that the crisis is something temporary, passing, and transient, we are caught up in a new cycle of crisis. So there's nothing more permanent than the crisis, in which case we're not talking about the crisis, we're talking about the collapse of a system. This system is capitalism. Now, why is Freire important? Freire is very important at this point in time because he gave us not just the language and the tools with which to be able to understand the crisis and the origins of the crisis, but also ideas that we can put into practice to mitigate the effect of a crisis and find our way out of it. So I will focus my this part of my intervention on the UK and especially UK education and UK higher education. I think Freire's importance cannot be emphasized enough because we increasingly have dialogue in our classrooms. We increasingly have dialogue between those of us who work in education and different sectors of society. And we increasingly have a disturbance of the dominant paradigm. And I'll give you a few examples what I mean by that. There has been a lot of intellectual production, a lot of books and articles published utilize Freire's ideas and thoughts and tools, and I think this is quite appropriate, this is quite right, but there has also been, and I think this is the other beauty of Freire's contribution, there have been experimentations with different forms of doing education, what Freire would call ways of being, not just acting, being with the world. So we have, even in the UK, not the most radical of places in the world, but we have had over the last 10, 15 years or so, social movements, student movements in higher education, for instance, organized over the increase in tuition fees and have since made various contributions to the intellectual and public debate in the UK. So we had experimentations and explorations of different alternative forms of education. For instance, there's now a well-established cooperative university. There's different open and free universities, ways of organizing higher education that try to disrupt the dominant narrative, which in the UK is very top-down, very capitalist, and almost totally privatized. Higher education fees, as most of you know, are the highest in Europe and some of the highest in the world. So what do we get with Freire that we didn't have before? We got pedagogic innovation, got dialogue in education. Importantly, we got prefiguration, what I just described, what I just discussed, different forms of organizing education. We also got dialogue with the movements. A very good example is the former Labour Party leader, Jeremy Corbyn. His movements. The example is the former Labour Party leader, largely Corbyn, with some of his movements. The example is the former. So we also got new epistemologies. We got this disruption of the dominant narrative, that all the terms that we can use to describe movements, describe progress, they come, from the dominant paradigm, which is a colonialist paradigm. So we got new ways of talking about things, and that really became clear in the Black Lives Matter. We got talking about really, and that really became clear in the Education Lives Matter, to think of a higher education institution right now in the UK, which has not embraced the idea of decolonizing the curriculum, if not think other of a higher education institution right now in the UK, its operation, other facets of its activity. And don't forget that, you know, for critical pedagogues, critical educators, that has been a dream come true. Of course, it doesn't stop here, but being able, you know, to be in the lion's mouth, as it were, and use the language that Freire, you know, was using, is something that we should not underestimate. We were not able to have this conversation with university management about decolonizing our curriculum, about white curriculum, about dominant paradigms, and so on. So this is happening. I think to a large extent, this has to be credited to the processes that have been created by the radicalism, the freshness of Freire's contributions. So why is Freire's thinking important? It's also important because of the challenges facing humanity, climate change, penetration of big tech during and because of the pandemic, and of course the collapse of capitalism, or rather the transformation of capitalism to something that is not neoliberalism anymore. And I think we could have this conversation. So thanks very much again. I hope we can extend this conversation by bringing in experiences of our audience and trying to prefigure the new stage of social relations we're moving into. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Spiros, for your first impressions. Now I'm going to hand over to Sueli. She's going to lead the second round of questions in this time. Please, Sueli, if you'd like to step in.
Yes, thank you, Gibson. First of all, thank you for this partnership with Cambridge University, MST, and the University of East Anglia. I'm calling Maria de Jesus, first of all. She's going to talk a little bit about experience, some information on the experience that the landless movement has. And we have two questions. If you address them, please, Maria Jesus. What might be the falling to ask that the MST should be asking? Sorry, what questions might be failing to ask and that the MST has been asking? So perhaps the broader community or the universities or other contexts, they have been failing to ask some questions that you have been asking yourselves already. And the other question is, what factors make these questions a big challenge, questions you've been asking yourselves? Thank you.
Maria Jesus, please.
Maria Jesus.
Is she there?
Maria de Jesus, talvez a interpretação não tenha entrado. Você quer que eu fale em português?
Sim, porque eu não consegui. Eu não
Maria
estou.
Jesus has been having.
A interpretação não entrou, né?
Não, para mim não.
Ok, então esse segundo eixo é a parte das experiências, né? A experiência...
Sueli is now using Portuguese to address two questions to Maria de Jesus, one of the representatives from MST.
E que são perguntas que o MST...
Professor Sueli Fidago is repeating the two questions Gibson, she has already asked.
Essas perguntas representam desafio em relação a que fatores? To the general public, I'm just I asked the same questions in Portuguese.
Maria Ângela, na primeira, só me repete o início da primeira, por favor.
Pois não. As perguntas, quer dizer, a gente acredita que o MST tem se feito várias perguntas ao longo desses anos, e essas perguntas têm pautado as ações do MST, né? São perguntas que muitas vezes outros contextos, como as universidades, as escolas, outros coletivos, outros contextos sociais, não têm se feito. E a gente queria ouvir um pouquinho de você. Que perguntas são essas, quer dizer, que pautam, que perguntas têm pautado as experiências do MST e que muitas vezes não são perguntas que vocês acreditam que outros contextos têm se feito?
Gostaria de partilhar que o MST é o primeiro movimento social, é o primeiro movimento camponês no Brasil que completa 37 anos. Todos os outros movimentos camponeses do nosso país, eles foram massacrados, eles não duraram 15 anos. Todos tiveram uma duração com menos de 15 anos. E o MST, eu acredito assim que ele, para nós, ele é uma grande escola. Nós temos aprendido isso no MST. O MST é uma grande escola e o coletivo é um grande educador. E o nosso movimento, acreditava assim, eu digo, como será que nós vamos resistir no início, né? No início dessa pandemia? E nós nos recriamos. Olha, o movimento, ele criou o Plano Nacional Plantar Árvores, Produzir Alimentos Saudáveis, com uma meta para nós, famílias assentadas e acampadas, de plantar 100 milhões de árvores nos nossos biomas. Árvores, a maior parte árvores nativas e frutíferas. Veja, né, que ação. Plantar solidariedade. Nós temos nossas áreas, nossas terras conquistadas, nossas terras livres do latifúndio, do agronegócio, dos agrotóxicos. Nós vamos produzir solidariedade, plantando solidariedade. Gente, isso não é pequeno. Plantar solidariedade na terra livre, conquistada pela reforma agrária. Nós estamos fazendo isso no nosso país. Nós já distribuímos mais de 5 mil toneladas de alimentos e vamos seguir produzindo muitos alimentos agora para o Natal. Mas nós não queremos, nós queremos dizer, inclusive para as famílias pobres das periferias do nosso país, que a reforma agrária é uma saída para o trabalho e para a fome. E é nesse sentido que o nosso movimento, em 2022, retomará grandes ocupações no nosso país, com as pessoas que estão desempregadas e com as pessoas que estão passando fome. E não são poucas, são milhões. São milhões. Milhões diante de uma política perversa, né, que prioriza o lucro e não a vida. Então, nesse sentido, nós temos também nos perguntado muitas. Olha, eu estou no movimento, né? Tenho a alegria de estar no movimento.
To have capitalism and money to be part of the movement. We know, as part of the movement, the good, bads, and the good and the bad times of being part of this movement. We, as part of the workers' movement, we are only a part of it, and we are gathering in order to struggle and to survive in such a difficult time here in Brazil in terms of economy. A different challenge that we have is how we can work, or how can we resist against some of the ideas of our Brazilian President Bolsonaro and how to fight for our rights. And we use Paulo Freire's idea in order to help us understand and to get ourselves organized in order to fight for this. I have read The Pedagogy of the Oppressed twice this year in order to search or in order to understand, based on Freire's idea, to critically understand the moment which we are living. And this makes it for me to understand what we are facing here in Brazil, and to understand the ideas of capitalism and the power of capitalism and the way capitalism makes people subserve things, dehumanize the condition of beings. And he we have been facing a lot of deaths because of feminicide and for the LGBTQI plus community who suffer in our country. The death of so many origin people, the landless workers, and the social injustice and lack of we are facing a moment in which it is very important for us to work with popular communities to reorganize our processes, our internal processes, in order to fight for our rights. Especially because if we want to get out of these zones in which we feel unequal to others, it is really hard. It is very important for social movements in Brazil, such as the MST, to get organized and to be part of this community wherein we fight for our rights. All the oppressed and the excluded and the ones who are being suffered from this social inequalities and injustice find in these movements the ability to feel agents of their reality. The last word cannot be something from from other people or based on the capitalism, but we as a community have the right to give it a say, give a final word on what we want. We have been dominated. Our media and is not the quality of Brazilian media is not necessarily helpful, and it's dominated by 5 different forces in Brazil. It's not democratic. It only tells one version of the story, and every time they talk about the popular classes, they show rebellions, and they show they show crimes. They do not show the positive aspects of the communities, and we as part of the community, we ask ourselves, how is it that we can get people together in a moment where everybody is so fragmented? Why is it that the questions are, what is it that put us together? What is it that unites us as a class, as Brazilians? And this is one thing that we take into account when we want to think our policies. One of these things, we are very happy to be part of this initiative, which we also believe that is a way to help spread the word of the things and the advances that we have organized as a social movement. The schooling system is very important, not only for rural areas, but for everyone who wants to take part in this revolution in order to make a society, to make a better society. The society we live in requires different ways of thinking and different ways of living in the society, which are not necessarily related to the gathering of money. It's not about building things. We have to understand our reality and the social aspects of the different classes and the struggle between these classes. We do hope that within this, this left wing, we do hope that we strengthen the left wing parts of our forces in order to go against the right wing aspects and politics that have been ruling our country.
Agora, now I'm going to call Professor Mariangela Graciano from Unifesp. She's going to talk a little bit about Freire's work at Unifesp, the work based on Paulo Freire at Unifesp, a little bit about the teacher initial education, the project of the conference that is being held at Unifesp, Paulo Freire, 100 anos de praxis libertadora, Paulo Freire, 100 years of liberating praxis, and a little bit about educational practices in the Brazilian prisonal system. And Mariangela, we would like to ask you to, as you talk about these topics, to address two questions. The first one is, how could the understanding of these experiences be distorted in the era of post-truth? And what factors make this a difficult problem to deal with? If you do that, and at the same time, try to address a little bit of what Maria Jesus has just said, it would be great. Thank you. Mariangela, você teve acesso?
Obrigada. Pronto?
Thank you.
Eu vou compartilhar aqui com vocês algumas experiências que nós temos tido na Unifesp.
I'm going to share some of the experiences that we have been having at Unifesp based on the ideas of Paulo Freire.
Como é que essas ações certamente podem ser e são, motivos de distorção.
I'll try to address the questions proposed by Professor Sueli.
Vamos começar dizendo assim,
And
a primeira ação que eu trago, que eu chamo de leituras de Paulo Freire na formação inicial de professoras e professores. Essa foi uma ação.
The first action is the possibility of is the reading of Paulo Freire's work, and it's a course which is part of the curriculum of the pedagogy course at Unifesp. So it's the pedagogy course is a course that trains teachers for elementary education. The pedagogy course, the ones attend the pedagogy course also attend other different courses at Unifesp as well. One of the reasons why these students enroll in the pedagogy course at Unifesp is because they want to read Paulo Freire and they want to become a bit more familiarized with his ideas. And I wonder where this curiosity about Paulo Freire's ideas come from, understanding that these students, they are young and they were not necessarily that much encouraged to read Paulo Freire in school, for example. So students who look for us, they have already experienced some of the theory of Paulo Freire because they were part of social movements. Some of them, these students, they come from families whose relatives, moms, for example, they are already part of the social movements, and these women, these moms from these families, because of the idea of Paulo Freire, they share that with their families and they become a bit more interested in the ideas of Paulo Freire. There is also a movement from the technical school here in São Paulo. Teachers from these regular schools, they annually organized a week based on Paulo Freire's ideas and research. And when they get to university, they want to know a bit more about Paulo Freire and his idea. His idea and his legacy has become so big in this course that there was one semester in which students would read 5 different books by Paulo Freire. And this is a great thing, especially because public universities such as Unifesp have been suffering pressure from the government by saying that we do a lot of balbúrdia, which is rebelling against people and other institutions. We have read and discussed different books by Paulo Freire, and I'm also inviting Maria Jesus to help and join our discussion next time we read The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. We are not necessarily, by working with Paulo Freire books and ideas, we are not dominating, or we are not making it some sort of banking education with his work. Instead, we are giving students the opportunity to critically read and reflect upon Paulo Freire's idea, because we want to stimulate our students to produce knowledge based on his idea. There is no problem in criticizing Paulo Freire's idea. In fact, Paulo Freire himself said that there was no problem in doing so. The thing is, we have to criticize the idea, but it is important that whenever we want to criticize Paulo Freire's idea or any other idea, we have to make it scientific. We have to consider true arguments and solid arguments in order to do so. We have constituted a study group, and different professors from different professors were involved, or were organized, or were involved, and we have organized also a congress based on Paulo Freire at Unifesp. Throughout the year, we have started preparing around May 11 university teachers, professors, and many students got together in order to organize this homage to Paulo Freire. Basically, every week we have a special activity to celebrate Paulo Freire's ideas and his legacy. We have already involved many different people from Brazil and from different countries, other professors, teachers from regular schools, and also students at Unifesp. Now I'm gonna share an experience based on Paulo Freire's experience. We want to continue permeating a horizontal relationship in between students and teachers. When we were discussing the visual identity for this Congress and this homage to Paulo Freire, one of the students said something. Maybe creating or thinking of a contest for creating this design doesn't actually make sense, especially if we take into account Freire's idea. Based on Freire's idea, we cannot encourage competition or students going against the other. So because of this student contribution, we have changed our approach, and we organized a collaborative group in which this design was created by a group of people, by a community. So meaning we were not doing or preparing something to somebody, but we were doing something together with others and with others. And well, as for the third moment, I'm going to talk about my Brazilian prison system and the work in this prison systems. So we have organized this group involving different professors and students and some specific organization. We have been organizing reading circles with these students from the prison system here in Brazil. We have been organizing some experiments or experimentation with these teenagers. We have organized some exhibitions based on the production, based on the reading cycles by those learners in the prison system. Paulo Freire is part of this experience because we had the chance to go to the prison, get to know the reality of these learners, and because we understood a bit more of this reality, we managed to organize this work. In Brazil, we have around 800 people who are within our prisons, and we sometimes forget that those who are in there for a period of time are not necessarily, we might not understand them as people, and it's very important that we understand and we get to know their reality in order to work with it. Taking into account these learners' reality, it's not simple to understand the system, the prisonal system here in Brazil, which frees, as we get to know the reality in prisons, and when we think together with these people and among our team of teachers, it is possible for us to think of some possibilities. So, first of all, we commit to unveil what our possibilities are. Second, to think about teacher education in a way that we help teachers understand the social stigma that some groups and some minorities face on a regular basis. And last but not least, every educational practice, meaning go to our prisons and produce knowledge together with these students who are within prisonal system, we are humanizing all the ones involved in the project, those who are there having lessons and also the ones who are leading the process. And then Sueli asks, but this, isn't this, can we stick to the true meaning of this practice in a post-truth era? What are the mechanisms that the oppressors use to maintain the society the way it is? Paulo Freire would not say things such as fake news and post-truth era, but Paulo Freire would say things such as propaganda, which is show an idea, show a slogan, and state something as truth without giving the possibility for reflection. So if you think of all the criticism towards universities, towards public universities, this is also a way to show how we are being oppressed. So one way of going against this is by making a dialogue or proposing dialogues. So every time, one way of solving this or one way of making this making this happen is by establishing a dialogue with the community, with the society, by establishing a dialogue with social movements and opening the doors of our universities to those who have never considered the possibility of taking part or becoming one of students in the society, in the universities, understand their possibilities with the graduation course. Paulo Freire says that education illuminates reality, and there are many ways of illuminating this reality. There are many different shades of illuminating realities, such as light or bulbs and lamps, and also small little insects that shine at night. So whatever is it that, whatever the way or the possibility that you have to illuminate reality, it is worth doing and it's worth taking. So establishing a dialogue with society is crucial and very important for improvement.
I'd like to ask you please to read the chat, because there are some people asking for further information about the group, the study group, and also the 100 Years of Liberating Praxis. Now we go to Spiros. He's going to talk a little bit about the Taiwanese Sunflower Movement, law clinics in Chechnya, secondary school teachers in Greece, and popular movements in Fortaleza, Brazil. So, and we'd like to ask you, Spiros, if you could answer two questions as well. Do we need to rethink how we are labeling these experiences? If not, why not? And if you think we do, then please give some examples.
Great. Yes, thanks very much. I think this is, it's really hard to follow Maria Angela and Maria de Jesus after all they've said. So I'm going to take you on a small trip, not around the world, around a few places where I've had the opportunity to be part of the change that took place there. And that change was inspired and was informed by Freirean ideas. And as a way of introduction, what might connect a student movement by Freirean ideas, human rights clinic in Chechnya or teachers' movement in Greece, is no other than Freire's work. Yes, I think what really connects all of these different applications of Freire's ideas is the versatility of his work and the freshness, as I said earlier, of his ideas. It's not a surprise that a lot of my students have found inspiration in Freire, and a lot of many other people still find inspiration in Freire's ideas because of the possibility to apply them in different contexts, because of the lack of prescriptiveness. This is not a recipe for success. We all know that there is a great deal of experimentation, trial and error, from theory to action and reflection to reflection, and all over again, action, theory, reflection. It's not easy, and many people drop the effort halfway through. But I think what gives his ideas this impetus is the fact that they're open, they're dialogical, non-dogmatic, and his ideas can be applied from the bottom all the way up to the top. In relation to the Taiwanese student movement, I had a student on the MA, which I have had the pleasure of directing for the last 6-7 years here at the University of East Anglia. It's an MA on learning pedagogy and assessment. And I have a module there which I revamped, and I did a very strong critical education, alternative education, democratic education element to it. And I remember 3-4 years ago when we were discussing Freire, I had a student, Tao is her name, from Taiwan, who stood up and said, well, look, I think there's something here that we need to discuss in relation to Taiwan. Long story short, we got immersed in a conversation how much of what students were doing during the 2014 student movement, also known as the Sunflower Movement, how much of that could be analyzed, was part of what Freire had in mind. So we started the discussion, which ended up in us presenting our work and publishing this work, and discussing what students tried to do there. In a nutshell, we had hundreds of students occupying the parliament equivalent of Taiwan. Taiwan is a very complicated country. All countries are complicated, but we have had British occupation. We have had Chinese. Some people would not like, excuse me, to call it occupation, but influence. And as of recently, we had many voices calling for the independence, Taiwanese Republic, and so on. The students, they noticed that there was at the time a trade agreement which came to Parliament to be ratified. Instead of debate and dialogue, what they got was a 30-second ratification of the treaty. So the students thought, well, hold on a second, this is not democracy. This is not what the Parliament should be doing. The Parliament should not be rubber stamping agreements that have been largely shaped by China, influenced by economic interests on the other side of the island, that Taiwan is an island. There's something wrong with our democracy. So they occupied the legislative building, which makes up the Parliament, and they said, we're not going to go away unless you accept to put this agreement to debate, to dialogue. So that moment was a forming moment, because the students did not demand, their demands did not amount to any material concessions, like, student fees, decrease in student fees, as in many other movements around the world, Chile, the UK, Greece, and so on. But they demanded actually democratic procedures. They demanded proper ratification process, and dialogue with people of Taiwan, which was unheard of. And in the accounts of some of the students, participants in this movement, there was quite a lot of Freire, there was quite a lot about dialogue, there was quite a lot about humanization, there was quite a lot about the awakening of the awareness of the Taiwanese people, conscientize us out, basically, conscientization. So we applied the Freirean analysis into the movement. The paper traveled. It got very warm acceptance in some circles within Taiwan. It got a lot of criticism in some other circles. A couple of weeks ago, Tao and I present our paper here at UEA. We got some questions that were not hostile, but as you can understand, they were very, very skeptical of our right to criticize the Taiwanese government. It's the kind of debate that, you know, we really wanted to provoke. That movement really wanted to pursue dialogue, really found this as an opportunity to create a rift with practices up to that point that were anti-dialogical. So they were trying to implant a little bit of Freire into the Taiwanese society. The next year, as it happened, I had another student who was very, very motivated as well. He came from a background in law. He had set up his NGO in Chechnya. And again, it was after week 5 when we started discussing Freire and his ideas that he kept coming to my office to see me and to discuss his ideas. And I remember at some point during the end of the semester, he formed his idea of setting up a law clinic in Chechnya. When I heard about it, I said, okay, great. And how could I help? What could my contribution be? And he said, Freire, you know Freire, you can help me set it up along these ideas. At the time, I really struggled to understand what he had in mind, but as we started convening and dialoguing and discussing, I realized that he took his Freire really seriously. So he saw a great deal of human rights discussion and support that needed to take place in Chechnya that was not happening. And he felt that having law clinics, talking to people about human rights and sticking up for them was a very good instantiation and application of Freire's ideas. Due to various issues which I'm not at liberty to discuss, the idea had to be put on hold. I'm hoping to be able to give you an update in due course, but this is something that came with some challenges, let's put it like this. Then during 2009 and for a few years after that, I had a project going back and forth to Greece, exploring the student and the higher education movement. Greece at that time had signed 2 memoranda of agreement with its lenders, some banks basically, and the European Union gave money to Greece to sign its debt away. Teachers did not like this, they took to the streets, and I kept going back and discussing their experiences and how we could understand the movement. And what came out very clear was that those teacher activists, they were thinking and discussing in Freirean terms, not only in Freirean terms, they were using Naomi Klein's account about dogma, capitalism. Some of them, they were using more radical ideas, they were going back to Marx. Some others were using more recent ideas, they were going to Boaventura de Sousa Santos. But what was very clear was that Greece at the time was a very fertile ground for experimentation with alternative forms of supporting, of solidarity. Teachers were sticking out for their students, they were providing all sorts of things that the students needed, food, clothes. They were organizing bazaars in order, to cover the students' basic material needs. They were also talking about, they were critiquing the state. Where is the state? We playing the role of the state. What do we learn from this? What other spaces of solidarity are there? Is there international solidarity movement? Where can we get a helping hand? A very immersive experience and some application of Freire's ideas. Then very briefly, when I was in Fortaleza for the first time in September 2015, I happened to take part in a very big mobilization, which was against the media, and their own media were playing in brainwashing Brazilian society into accepting basically the rule of the media moguls. One of them was Bolsonaro, and it was becoming at the time very clear. We're talking about 2015. It was becoming very clear that he was going to play a big role in Brazilian domestic politics. Little did we know that what this demonstration was trying to do was create an awareness, conscientization for process, for social processes that wouldn't be as dehumanizing. Little did we know that these processes would become so embedded and so deep in the next 6 years that we'll be talking about the limitations of Brazilian democracy. We'll be talking about the grip that media hold on Brazilian society, things that Mariangela and Maria de Jesus spoke about earlier. And this, though, at the same time was a movement that paved the way for the anti-Bolsonaro protests that have been taking place in the last couple of years. So they were, if you wish, the workshops of solidarity. They were the workshops of resistance against the rule of Bolsonaro. Using alternative labels, yes, absolutely. I think one of the side effects of colonization is that it has deprived us of alternative ideas, alternative conceptions, and alternative labels. Think about Arab Spring. Arab Spring is not a name that Arab Spring activists themselves gave to their movement. Think about the student protest in Chile, 2016, 2011, and many others in between. They were called Chilean winter, I think. Again, that was not a label that was adopted by activists in the student movements. In fact, the latter was a label that was given by New York Times journalists, somewhere, in the West, as it happened. So we definitely need new labels, but even more than that, I don't think that we should consume ourselves. The question should not be about which one is the best label to describe this, which one is the best label to relate to resistance against fascism, post-truth, Bolsonaro, Trump, and so on. I think the big question facing us is what processes, what discourses are there in disrupting the dominant narrative, the dominant discourse. I think this is the big challenge. So yes, as we are looking for different narratives and labels are part of creating and talking about the alternative narratives, we need those processes that will disrupt the dominant way we talk about movements, which is a byproduct of colonialism. And let me give you an example. When we talk about social movements, I think Maria de Jesus spoke about that very eloquently. When we talk about movements, when mainstream media talk about movements, they're one step away, one breath away from branding them as mavericks, as violent radicals, as outlaws, as outside of democracy, or even as directly opposed to democracy. This is the dominant narrative we need to disrupt. Social movements like the MST, like Black Lives Matter, like many other movements around the world, they are not those who are opposed democracy, they're those that enrich democracy. And we need to disrupt this dominant narrative because it's catastrophic, it's pernicious. Look what Bolsonaro does, look what Trump does, and look what mainstream media do. I have a lot more other examples that I could be using in relation to how social movements are demonized. I think we'll probably run out of time. I'll be happy to develop some of these points further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Spiros. We are actually quickly getting short of time. So I'm going to ask the panelists now to please try to answer in at the most 5 minutes if we can, because we have about 15 minutes, so 5 for each one, and then a quick closing moment. Bearing in mind what Spiros has just said about the future, about what we need to do, what we must do, we are moving on now to the axis when we're going to speak about the future. So for Maria de Jesus, I'd like to ask the following questions. What is likely to happen as a result of what you are going to propose? You're going to talk about the banking education, the public system in Brazil, let's say, public system in the MST especially. So what is likely to happen as a result? And how do we need to look at what is happening? Is there another way that we can look at it? Maria de Jesus?
Maria Ângela, eu estou com aquele problema da tradução.
Ah, tá. Maria de Jesus, é o seguinte, a pergunta qual a relação entre a educação do Brasil, o MST, e as políticas do governo, a questão da educação bancaria e a educação do campo, o que vocês esperam que aconteça nesse jogo de forças, e se é possível olhar de outra forma essa relação entre a educação brasileira, a educação do campo e as políticas de governo que estão sendo implementadas e muitas vezes de forma a sucatear.
Gibson is translating the questions to Maria de Jesus.
E Maria de Jesus, a gente pediria para você tentar responder em 5 minutos para dar tempo dos 3 palestrantes falarem.
So he's asking Maria de Jesus to give her answers in 5-minute tops.
Nós, enquanto setor de educação do MST, temos
the MST educational movement has 2 main objectives: to fight for the access and the right of the access of public educations in encampments and settlements. Since so infantil, like kindergarten, up until university level. The second aim is to build our educational projects together with the ones who are involved, together with the ones taking part in the schooling system. Students, managers, families, organizations, and everyone who is part of their reality. Throughout this trajectory, we have been facing a lot of challenges. There are many reforms happening in Brazil. We have limited resources. We have some constitutional amendment, 95 constitutional amendment against social rights with regards to the health and education areas in Brazil.
Então, ano passado,
so Last year, 49% of the tax was to pay for Brazilian debts, and education and education was in the education area, and the education, both education and health area, were not privileged. We have also faced we have also faced problems concerning
em relação aos direitos dos professores, né? Hoje muitos direitos sendo negados, inclusive ameaças, né, sobre gratificações que foram conquistadas, mas que agora querem retirar, e nós estamos na luta para garantir o financiamento público, né, de qualidade da qualidade da educação. Um outro aspecto para nós é o fechamento de escolas. No Brasil, no campo brasileiro e nas periferias das cidades, a educação, que é um direito humano fundamental, ele está sendo negado pelo fechamento de escola. Já são 103 mil escolas. São 103 mil escolas que estão sendo fechadas. Foram fechadas, né, de 2003 para cá. Então, nós vivemos assim um grande enfrentamento nessa questão. Mas, ao mesmo tempo, nós resistimos. E temos grandes experiências em nossas comunidades. Desde, assim, os princípios da educação do campo. Né? Essa educação, o nosso projeto educativo, nós nos reivindicamos herdeiros e herdeiras da educação construída pela classe trabalhadora. Desde a Comuna de Paris, né, que é a nossa primeira revolução, né, proletária, desde essa nossa experiência da classe trabalhadora na Rússia, na Revolução Russa, em Cuba, né, na Nicarágua, na América Latina, com a educação popular, com Paulo Freire. Então, nós nos reivindicamos como construtores e lutadores e lutadoras, construtoras, lutadores e lutadoras por um projeto de educação emancipador, transformador da realidade, contra-hegemônico, que, de fato, fortaleça as lutas populares, o campo, né, enquanto projeto de vida, projeto de luta, projeto de construção, né, da dignidade dos camponeses e camponesas, frente à desigualdade social. Então, a nossa luta, ela segue, né, temos várias experiências nos vários níveis de educação. Na educação infantil, temos as cirandas infantis, que funcionam nas lutas, que funcionam nos encontros, nas várias atividades do MST, que fortalece a participação nossa das mulheres no movimento, porque não é porque nós estamos com nossas crianças pequenas.
Many projects which we are involved, and we take part in many different projects. We have fight for the schooling system for our youth and adult learners, our worry and dedication towards the economics. We understand the important connection between education and agriculture, and the debate in terms of making education the basis of human education. We believe in education, and I believe that all the ones involved in this group and in this Congress today, we understand education as a process of humanization and emancipation. We have in our schools worked with the matrices of education. How is it that we educate ourselves? We have learned through pedagogy and through history of education. We are educated through our fights, our struggle, our collective and collaborative experience by the pursuit of to be freed from the oppressed. We are educated by our work, by our education, our culture, and our history. The way we understand history is based on how the when we see ourselves and we understand ourselves as part of history, we understand as part of this social community, and we are together in this fight for against the dehumanizing process because and based on capitalism. Capitalism explores, and it clearly states, especially for the popular classes, the barba. And we keep on the struggle. We are building on and we are working on the struggle. We believe, and we want a better opportunities in society against this. We celebrate Paulo Freire because he inspires us to go on with the struggle and to the build of this new popular group. And the landless workers movement, we understand and we help movement.
It's very inspiring. Your talk is extremely inspiring. I'm very inspired by everything that you said and by the Mystica, everything. I'm actually a bit emotional at the moment. I will ask Mariangela and Spiros, please, too. I'm not going to ask you any more questions because we are running out of time. We actually began a little later, so that's why we are running out of time. But I'd like you to speak a little bit about what you wanted to say as a closing, or to say what you want to say, of course, but also closing closing your speech now. I'm not going to ask you any questions. Thank you. First, Mariangela, and then speak. Thank you.
And after that, just a closing video, the Mystica, which is 5 minutes. And the questions, please, because we run out of time. They are more than welcome. Send it to us. Leave your name and email, and we're more than happy to answer all your questions. Okay. I do apologize for just working against the clock approach. Thank you. Mariangela, é com você.
Mariangela.
Okay. Então, eu só dizia assim, primeiro agradecer muitíssimo a oportunidade de estar aqui, aprendendo.
I thank a lot for the opportunity of being here, and I have been learning a lot with Professor Spiros, Maria José. Many thanks for this experience. We leave this opportunity having built different sorts of knowledge based on different experiences that we have heard. I'd just like to remember or to remind us of the conversation between Paulo Freire and rural workers. He was talking about the virtues of educators in Brazil. There are two different temptations that we have to run away from. The first one is desesperança, the fact that we cannot be not being hopeful, the fact that we look at the reality as is, thinking about the number of times we have tried the same thing and we are still here. We still have to explain the basics, why we have to do the very same things again and again and again. Why are we here to just explain the basics to those who were already supposed to know what they meant? We have to run away from this. We have to get rid of this temptation because of that, we might lead to cynicism. which means that we cross our arms and that we stop doing things that we were supposed to do. So we cannot desesperançar, we cannot lack hope in terms of a better future and a more effective perspective. We also have to believe that it's possible to build bridges and dialogue opportunities among different people and different cultures. When we think of Brazil specifically, we have to resist the oppression towards public education. And we have to use our Lei de Diretrizes e Bases here in Brazil, our Brazilian guidance towards Brazilian education, and we have to resist the isolation. So we are not isolated. So this oppression tends to isolate people and make them, we have to focus and privilege the collective, the collaboration work, and we have to be open to social movements and the communities. Many thanks.
I'd like to ask Spiros to speak now.
Okay.
Your closing speech. Thank you.
Sure, yes, thank you. Quero dizer muito obrigado aos organizadores. It's really important that we keep the door open to international solidarity and resistance. It's very important that we maintain these discussions, this dialogue. Some of you put in the discussion, it's really hard to discuss, to dialogue with a government that is not willing to listen, like Bolsonaro's government. Well, it's like that in most places I'm aware of. I don't have time to go into this, but what I'm trying to highlight is the need to stick together internationally. Capital is reorganizing itself, rest assured, after the pandemic is going to bite with even more force than ever before. And I think the teachings and the ideas of Freire, resistance, solidarity, and collaboration are ever more important. Again, muito obrigado. Lutamos.
Yes, thank you very much. Now we're going to have a closing video, 5 minutes. And because you run out of time, I do apologize once again. Please leave your name and email. We answer all your questions. We address to the panelists accordingly. Okay? Thank you. I'm going to play now the video. Por favor, o vídeo. Hello? Yes.
Se o educar vai mais longe que braços com a poesia, vamos cantar Paulo Freire pela grandiosidade da sua pedagogia.
Já que você me sorriu, vamos fazer parceria. Você pega o violão, eu escrevo a poesia pra falar de educação, essa nossa cantoria.
Quanto mais as massas,
The more the popular masses unveil the objective and challenging reality which they are part of, by also having the need to transform it, the more critically they insert themselves into it.
Por ela, aprendendo nessa guerra, soletrar cidadania.
Human beings are built through words, through work, through action and reflection upon action, not in silence. A psychoanalysis of oppressive action might reveal the false generosity of the oppressor as a dimension of the later sense of guilt. With the false generosity, he attempts not only to preserve an unjust and necrophilic order, but to buy peace for himself. It happens that peace cannot be bought. Peace is experienced in solidarity and loving acts, which cannot be incarnated in oppression.
Subtrair e somar, vive de felicidade, pra vida multiplicar.
I am absolutely happy to be alive here today and the opportunity to have accompanied this march and movement, which, like other historical marches, reveals a loving will to change the world, this march of the so-called landless. I would die happy if I heard about many other marches in Brazil. Marches of those who have no school, the ones who fail at school, the ones who want to express their love and affection and cannot do it publicly, the movements for those who refuse to obey, the ones to rebel, and the ones who are and are prohibited from being. I think, after all, that these marches are historical wanderings around the world, and the landless are today one of the strongest expressions of political and civic life in this country. That's why people speak against them, and even people who think they are progressive and who speak against them as if they were abusive, as if they were demonized or destroyers of the so-called order. Not really. Right on the contrary, they are one more time instead proving certain theoretical assertion by political analysis that it's necessary to fight to obtain transformation. No, but one liberates himself by his own efforts alone. Neither is liberated by order. Liberation is a human phenomenon, and the process of liberation must employ the methods of dehumanization.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Spiros, Mariangela, Maria de Jesus, and all the collaborators, Alexandre, Sueli, everyone got involved in this beautiful project in the last 3 months, a long project, but I think is a very successful. I'm really happy to see all of this going on and looking forward to the next possibilities between all of us. And a really pleasure to have all of you today. Thank you so much. Muito obrigado. Viva Paulo Freire! Fora Bolsonaro!
Ora!
Ora!
Eu também queria
helping
foi bem
in
complicado.
terms of
Hoje tivemos alguns
technological
problemas.
resource.
Temos desculpas
We have some technical issues, and we are really sorry for that.
Intérpretes que nos ajudaram. Sem vocês, nada disso aconteceria. Parabéns aos panelistas. Muito obrigada.
Thank you, professors, and thank everybody for
Parabéns,
being
obrigada
this morning. Thank you.
Muito obrigado.
Tchau.
La luta continua.
Obrigada.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Next time.